Okay, to my right is Sergio Roldan. Sergio is also a lawyer. He was a national director of prosecutions and was public defender for the ombudsman, national director, national coordinator for reparation and care for victims of the National Commission for Reparation and Reconciliation. Sergio is an expert in land restitution. He is an advisor to the Norwegian Refugee Council, the office in Colombia of the High Commissioner of the United Nations for Human Rights Development, the Program of the United Nations, to the Center of Historical Memory, and several national agencies and international agencies in rural issues. Sergio is also teaches land restitution in the externship University of. So I now give the floor to Sergio Roldan. Good morning. How are you all? Thank you very much to the National University, the Unity Restitution of Justice, the Swiss Corporation and Swedish Corporation for this important event. Yesterday we heard international experiences. Barbara gave us many elements. Bernadette also gave us some more. And today I'm giving more, and I think that relieves me a little to talk about international experience. Let's say that the restitution in the last 10 or 15 years in international experiences has acquired more vigor. It has been much more vigorous. The principle of restorative justice in the hard line, which Anneke spoke about, has gained a lot of space, especially in context of armed conflict whose causes are ethnic problems, occupational problems of, of other pasts or communist systems to a capitalist system. But finally, and with Eskol here, I will state from a study from a recent article. Well, not so recent. It says that restitution is the preferred mechanism that the states have sought the states have sought to meet the expectations and rights of the victims. This preferred mechanism marks a very specific line for judges and officials in Colombia who operate the restitution. And let's say a dilemma between what to do with a second occupant or claimant who is seeking restitution. Well, the first test that the judicial officer should do, well, I first have the obligation to repay. That's my main obligation. Now, what happens is that other phenomena begin to shift the balance between restorative justice and distributive justice. And then with those phenomena, difficult dilemmas begin to emerge, especially in post-conflict context, in context where we pursue reconciliation and look to transform situations of historical exclusion towards a situation of effective enjoyment of rights. Despite the restitution as the preferred mechanism, lands begin to open in recent doctrine elements that have to do with peace and reconciliation, and imposed elements begin to impose mechanisms of reconciliation to certain problems that arise in different contexts. I would like to, before addressing this issue, talk about three aspects that are fundamental to Colombia. First, the consensus that the land dispute is historical and is at the root of the armed conflict. And it would have to make history, and time does not allow it. But we know of agrarian reforms of 1936, land reforms in 61. It is a counter made by landowners. In the 70s, there was a counter reform to the reform of 61. In the 90s, a counter reform of the 89. The law 160 of 94, which is governing rural areas in Colombia, is a law that could not be effectively applied. And then the phenomena recently found of the penetration of illegal armed groups within the entities that were operating the rural world. We know of many public officials of Encoder who were and today are subject to criminal cases because in complicity with notaries, registrars and illegal armed groups, they stripped the farmers of their land who were once winners of these lands. Land reforms and these redistributive mechanisms that are in the constitution as our clause social state of rights. And so the land conflict is historical. Uh, we can add 53% of informality in these estates. An interest of landowners does not enter because formalizing means paying a property tax. And in this regard, we find properties of 80,000 hectares not paying property taxes in Colombia. And maybe it will be that one of the mechanisms that will persuade landowners to give up lands when a state comes in and charge them the annual property tax bill, and they will make a cost-benefit analysis to say that it is no longer economical to have 8,000 hectares of land. It has been seen in the Montes de Maria. You can travel along the Colombian roads, huge amounts of land with one or two cows, huge tracts of useless property. Land reform laws have indicated that two fundamental elements exist in the rural property, social function and ecological function, and against a large estate that has 30% which isn't productive. It will be possible that the land intervenes to expropriate and to allocate these lands to farmers who have no land. This historic theme about land issue is also key to look at because farmers that face this concentration of land have had to appeal to settlement areas to knock down jungle in remote areas of the country, or have even had to climb mountains. For those of you who are not from Colombia, you should know that the country is a land form that makes it very difficult, very different from other countries. They even say that Colombian geography is one of the most complex geographies in the world. There are three mountain ranges that are like three massive walls that separate different communities. 70% of cargo entering the country enters through a Pacific port. The trucks must climb a mountain range down to Valle del Cauca, where we have the richest lands in the country. Then scale the central mountain range to go back to the Valley of Tolima, and finally climb the biggest mountain range, the Eastern Cordillera, where we stand, to deliver the largest market that Colombia has, which is Bogota. 11 million products are imported from abroad. There is a great complexity in a central state that is here, just like the prince in the tallest tower in the film Shrek. He has to go to rescue the princess. Well, our government is a tremendously centralized government. A state of emptiness is the other element that I would like to address. Statelessness in the peripheries in these rural areas. No law, no authorities, legitimate penetration of armed groups within these authorities. A central state that has used a central elite and has caused the common ground on key resource extraction and raw materials to favour foreign investment, perhaps against the national economy and perhaps against the interests of the Colombian people. So statelessness that allows for armed groups to take possession of a territory, and this is the other element that I would like you to note, that our armed conflict is a prolonged conflict. We're talking about more than 50 years of the FARC and the guerrillas of the ELN. The protracted conflict built some social tissues around the law. The law of guerrillas, the gun code, the rifle code. Uh, this is the code that governs relations in these peripheries. So we are seeing these three key elements that we're also going to have to keep in mind that many of the secondary documents in Colombia from more than from 17 to 20 years ago, and I will then turn to the experience that I had with one recent human rights in Alto Tibaya in Meta, in the department in the center of the country, dominated by the FARC in the 80s, when the FARC took cocaine as one of their strategies and forcing farmers to grow coca leaves as a national goal. Many of them refused to enter this dynamic process, and so they sold their land to their neighbors and friends. I met with the second occupants, and they say, we stay here to resist and resist and resist during these 17 years. And today it turns out that we're being thrown off our land, and we have to go where we have a consolidated productivity. We have neighborly relations. We have a social fabric. We have full productivity. And I'll tell you one thing I said to them. I know the lady who is claiming this land, and she has told me that she will not return. It will probably be 2 years before the law allows you to sell that property, and to that extent the big dilemma for a judge who has to evict the farmer, because we're talking about that profile, a farmer who has productivity in the consolidated field, and probably has to leave to get a person who lost that attachment to the land, the attachment to productivity, and perhaps for the balance to be shed. The result we will find is that each return policy is largely ineffective. This is a difficult dilemma to resolve. And I was talking about a case involving 8 second occupants in the department of Meta, but the law of 1448 has emerged. And this is something that you also have to know, the law of victims. The law of 1448 didn't contemplate a treatment for secondary occupants, and was not an oversight, because I remember in 2009 having participated in an interagency technical committee of more than 14 entities in the National Commission for Reparation and Reconciliation, building something that was called the Program of Property Restitution, and in the Program of Property Restitution, which was released in the country, published in this publication, is no more than 20 pages devoted to the subject of the second occupants, i.e. since we knew the phenomenon of secondary occupants would be a rule, as it has been in the world, the second occupants have been the main obstacle to carry out the restitution. Perhaps for tax reasons, the law of victims was not included, and perhaps the legislature and those who handled the estate refused to see this. I wanted to cover their eyes and think this could be overseen, and here we are. Judges had to start to hear such cases. The judges of restitution, on the other hand, the unit of restitution, had to face the emergence of cases where there are more than 600 second occupants in the same area, to deal with cases where there is an entire neighborhood who had to evacuate. If it were to enforce the restitution as the preferred mechanism, and to that extent, the restitution unit reacted and issued an agreement in 2015. Just last year, because the judges had no legal authorization to organize humanitarian measures for the second occupants. So goes the agreement 021, an administrative agreement. And this is something that I think is great to tell, because that's where they begin to skate between ordinary justice and transitional justice. The judges did not see that an agreement emerged. Uh, an administrative entity was binding on them. Uh, they wanted it to be a law. Uh, that should be done through legal form, and well, here we are in a process of transitional justice, and for them it has been difficult to understand that departs from the ordinary justice. And transitional justice, as defined by the UN, means all mechanisms that a state can and should take to resolve or overcome situations of massive human rights violations. All mechanisms, it is a state of exceptional, and of course we have to safeguard international principles of of human rights, and we must safeguard clear democracy and the system of checks and balances. But in situations like those presented to us by second occupants, it is necessary to begin to ponder, to start using other tools that do not necessarily come from the law. So the judges refused to implement this agreement 021. Many courts in this country refused to implement this agreement until finally the national government issued a decree 440 of 2016. And after that decree, the unit was empowered to regulate the latter treatment of the second occupants, in a way that today we have a regulating body that recognizes measures of attention to the second occupant of attention, not reparation. Okay, we're talking about solidarity, not responsibility, and to that extent, these mechanisms of care represent the second occupant who is recognized by the judgment, must be recognized. The failure of the law must be recognized to be a creditor of these measures, a property. The truth is that it is very equivalent. It is a family farm unit, a measure that takes into Colón. And I guess in many parts of the world, when where they have land reform processes, family farm concept, unity, which allows the family to remunerate minimum wage and have another surplus to recapitalize minimum wage. In a way that the agrarian reform is delivered in meta, which are huge extensions, perhaps hectares, thousands of hectares, but elsewhere the family farm is 22 hectares. Then the law delivers a property that could not overcome the family farm unit in the area where it will deliver that property. That has some problems of justice, because sometimes the farm, as Anneke said, is bigger, and the land which I have to leave is much bigger than what I'm being offered. And to that extent, then, despite the problem of justice being inequity, and we cannot finance the payment of equivalent identical properties, because otherwise it would not be enough to meet more than 90,000 causes that are now requested in the restitution unit. There must be a rationality in the Colombian state. That land is delivered with housing, a productive project is planned, a vacuum state in all processes of agrarian reform. Technical assistance or support was to hand over the land to the farmers and never accompany them technically. Here we are supposed to overcome, and we will not repeat those. Here we are supposed to overcome, or we will not repeat those absences by the state. This time, it seems that we will accompany farmers to strengthen productivity. But while these court decisions that have already recognized womanhood status, elderly people, victim status, or conditions of being displaced, or who was not involved in violence, who was not involved, who even bought with good faith, does not extend their guilt, because our law requires good qualified faith. Uh, Even those failures have shown the opposition knew the context of conflict. The opposition knew that the area there was displacement. The opposition knew the need, the necessity that the seller had, and still watching their socio-economic status, has ordered measures of attention to the second occupants. Let's say that the fundamental criterion is the socio-economic status. The agreement. This opens a new actor in the restitution process. What is public advocacy? The agreement provides public defenders to represent the rights of secondary occupants in the restitution process. It is expected that it isn't a dispute, but an adversarial process. It is expected to be a process rather than an assistance and legal representation, but not a process where the opposition it is clear that you have to have a representation, but when the public defender that is sought is provided. Second, it is to characterize the socio-economic status and being able to propose to the judge propose adequate measures to their condition. So in many cases, the second occupant does not want to return to resume their agricultural life. They want a house in a city. It is then tried to resolve these cases, seeing the condition of the person and trying to hit adequate measures to overcome their vulnerable condition. I have about 3 or 4 minutes left. I hope that with the questions we can expand the context, but I want to finish quickly and say, well, that we have already solved some legal criteria, but now we need to resolve cases as whole neighborhoods in the north of Santander, in Barrancabermeja. Here we have entire neighborhoods between 500, 600 families, and everywhere second occupants are appearing. The challenge is will the state fund all of their needs? To what extent will the state cover the subject? Because it is one of the great challenges, which is to prevent people from losing their home. If the person gets evicted for the fact that they have to be restored and they are put under a bridge in displacement conditions, I think it's going to cause problems again. So I'll close here. Distributive justice will impose us to accompany restitution processes with large land banks, and those large land banks will have a large national impact. Okay, I give this total percentage of my land that could be done peacefully, but if you have seen that has not been done peacefully, Ferigan with anti-restitution farmers, with 700 restitution claimants threatened, endangered, etc. Ideally, in a context of peace, landowners would say, man, we're going to contribute because it's correct. We will return to the farmers. We will return to farmers who are in remote areas, in the mountains where it is difficult to bring education, health, access roads, productivity. Why we do not correct it? Why not recover the forests of these mountains, and why not deliver flat land to farmers close to infrastructure and close to production circuits? It is a public policy issue rather than inter-party strife in a restitution process, in a way that just like in Hungary, where the emphasis rather than restitution was having a much larger social impact, precisely to avoid conflicts. Why don't we think about that in Colombia? Colombia could have an approach to restitution that even the agreements in Havana have already said, the refund will accompany the return and collective reparation processes. So we need a big checkbook, some great resources, but more than that, um, th- we need the state's decision to undertake, for once and for all and seriously, processes of expropriation, processes of extinction, processes of agrarian reform. I'm sorry that the time is very short, but I hope we have the opportunity
Bueno,
to
muchísimas
to
gracias,
speak in
Sergio.
the questions. Thank you.